I must say, I'm pleased to see so many people interested in the budget presentation tonight. First part of the meeting is the public announcements and comments. Is there anyone in the audience that wishes to address the board with comments? Mr. Goldstein?
Good evening, John Papadonis.
Oh, I'm sorry.
John Papadonis, resident of West Yarmouth in Lowell, Massachusetts. I drove down from Lowell, Massachusetts this evening to state my support of the reinstatement of James Hoare as director of the Yarmouth Sailing Program. I feel very strongly about this. My son started sailing in 1985 and learned to sail in the Yarmouth Sailing Program, became an instructor, and I have nothing to say but in the highest regard for Jim Hoare. He taught my son to stand on his own 2 feet, to deal with adversity, and to become his own person, and most importantly, how to sail. And I've known Jim Hoare as an educator since that time, and he's a top shelf educator and a highly respected individual. And I'd like to appeal to this group to have him reinstated.
Thank you, Mr. Papadonis. I will say this. I suspect that a lot of you in the audience are in agreement with Papadonis. There's obviously not time tonight to get through everyone. I will try to get through some, but I apologize if I don't get to you. We are certainly receiving your letters and are sympathetic to your plight, and all I can say is that you are being heard. So again, I'll try to get through some of you, but I will likely not get to all of you, so I will apologize in advance for that. Mr. Goldstein?
Thank you. Happy New Year to all. I am the chairman of the Finance Committee, and I wanted to just address both the board and the general public on some issues the Finance Committee is dealing with and will continue to deal with. One is we are aggressively pursuing our review of the budget. I want to remind everyone that it is an open forum, and anyone who wishes to participate can certainly do so. Our meetings are Wednesday at 6:30. This week we'll be reviewing the police budget. At our last meeting, we had a resolution that I wanted to bring forward to the Board of Selectmen and to the community at large. And that was, we voted that no further funds should be expanded on the search for a town administrator. In November, we approved $20,000 for the search. I believe $19,000 has been spent. We believe that search was done under your direction, Board of Selectmen, and as far as the committee's concerned, there were nothing that is out of the ordinary that would preclude that an additional search would prove to be a different result. So I just wanted to let the board as well as the community know where the Finance Committee stood on that issue. I'm going to step back a minute now and take off my hat as Finance Committee and make a additional statement on the matter of a search. And that is, I think it's important for the town, for the workers of the town, and for the selectmen to understand the longer we wait to come up with a decision, the more detrimental it will be both to our employees and, in my mind, in the stature of this group. And that's really all I have to say. I'm not here to endorse or not endorse. I'm just here to let you know that expediency is definitely an important issue here. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Ms. Morris?
Well, I do want to have a say on the selection of the town administrator. I just don't understand why something like Peter Johnson-Staub's stand on the wastewater management wouldn't have figured prominently in your decision. He was so enthusiastic to have the town saddled with more than $350 million project. And on top of that, if you had proceeded to appoint him, you already have a person that you appointed to head the DPW who would be heavily involved in that. And he comes from Chatham. I'm not sure whether he was there when the Chatham project was voted upon, but he probably has a pretty good idea of what went on there. And then on top of it, you also reappointed the same consulting firm. So it would have been same old, if Peter had been appointed as the new town administrator. He also strikes me as being in favor of spending funds, taxpayer funds, very often speaking on behalf of those departments who would benefit from the spending of the CPA or the CPC funds, including ones that would go to Ms. Pat Armstrong's programs. And so now I want to go to that subject. I cannot think of a more arrogant person. Have you already forgotten the dust-up over the cemetery situation? And I mean, now she drops something in the midst of what I understand is a family tragedy with this kind of the firing, in effect, of a very popular and highly regarded person. I mean, that's and then uses a hackneyed cliche of taking the program in another direction. I trust it won't be directly into the wind, for God's sakes. This has got to stop, and this business of there's nothing we can do about it. Well, if the new town administrator is somebody other than Peter, perhaps that town administrator would be able to look at it again, at the whole situation, because it does need to be looked at. We cannot have somebody constantly upsetting people and with such arrogant behavior and landing on decent people in this town. There has to be a way to deal with this situation other than what you've done so far. And this wasn't a union matter, was it? I'm asking a question. I'm not.
No, it's a part-time employee, right?
So it's not a union. What I'm driving at is I trust we're not going to see a legal bill in the treasurer's office for the town to defend their decision. Because that should be something very straightforward. If you have the rights, why would you need to hire some kind of a lawyer to defend the town in this situation? I just, this has to be revisited again. No two ways about it. And you better find a way.
Hello, my name is Kristen Sullivan Stone, and I live in Yarmouth. Tonight, I'm here to stand up for a good man, Coach Jim Hoare. His contributions to our community over the last 35 years have been extraordinary. His positive influence is felt throughout our town and well beyond. You don't have to take my word for it. You've received letters, and we have nearly 700 people who have signed a petition to bring him back. And not only did they sign this petition, but most of them have left very heartfelt and meaty comments attesting to their experience with Coach Hoare. And the common theme is how great of an influence he has had on their lives. things like they would never have made it to college, or success in sports, college sports, success in relationships, in parenting, in their career. These are no small things. These are the things of life. In case you haven't been to the Yarmouth Sailing Center, let me try and paint a picture for you. When you go down there, it's like Disneyland. It's the happiest place on earth. Everybody there is having a good time. The kids are happy. They're being treated well. They're safe. The program has a stellar safety record. The parents are happy knowing that their children are safe and are not only learning sailing, but learning great life lessons like personal accountability and how to figure things out on your own, not just, here's how you do it. So why was Coach Hoare left go? And in such a way as you would to drop a sack of potatoes on the side of the road. I don't know what interpretation you've heard about the sailing center, but every time I've been there, what I've seen is a well-oiled operation where everyone is having a good and wholesome time learning sailing. I expect the stewards of my town to at least be curious enough to ask questions about this beyond one person's interpretation. At best, I expect my town leaders to speak out on this matter and call for an investigation. You do have authority in this matter. You represent the people of this town. We elected the selectmen to appoint and oversee the administrator. And when you have this many people questioning a decision, it is your job to look into it further. I feel that this is the right thing to do. It's not easy, but it's the right thing, and it wouldn't be the easiest thing for you all to do, but it is the right thing to do. How about conducting an online satisfaction survey of the program for the last 5 to 10 years of participants? Surely you have the emails of most of these people. It would be cheap and easy with something like SurveyMonkey. In fact, this should have been done all along. Why would you not want to see those results? Also, going forward, I would like to suggest that this position, because it is so important, this program does bring in a lot of money to the town. And so even people who are not sailing families should be concerned with its success. I believe that that position should not be in the sole hands of one person. The hiring and firing of that person should include an overview and input by the Recreation Committee or some other such group. It should include a yearly performance review with that committee and not a blindsiding after 33 years of founding and growing the program to the success it is today. If you truly care about our town, I ask you to take these actions. Everything is connected to our town's success. Our programs, our schools, our highly valued employees, and volunteers. This situation is just one link in the chain of all of our town. Saying that this is not important is like saying that our town is not important. It's all connected. Our community is watching, our young people are watching. Everybody is watching, our neighbors are watching. What is the message that we're sending by this decision and just letting it stand? Are we saying that when you do great service, we just let you go and don't ask any questions? I'm so sorry. Or do we celebrate success? Do we build people up and celebrate all the excellent employees and volunteers and programs in our town? I love my town. I love all the people in this town. And I think that we should take good care of those who take good care of us and our town. Coach is one of those people. Please bring him back.
Hi, my name is Pam Walsh, and I'm a resident of Sutton, Massachusetts during the school year, and a summer resident here for the last 19 years. I'm a school teacher in central Massachusetts, and I drove 2 hours to be here to speak with you this evening. I'm not going to belabor the points that were just made a few moments ago because they were eloquently stated and well said. I thank you. But I am going to simply say to you that for 19 years, I have brought my 3 daughters to Cape Cod. And the reason I chose to continue to return to Cape Cod every summer and enroll them time and time again in the Yarmouth sailing program is because of 2 men, Coach Jim Hoare and Ed Martin. Men of integrity, men of compassion, teachers. To be a teacher these days takes a lot of courage. If you're a true teacher, you care on levels that not everybody that's around you can always see. When you're a teacher, a true teacher, you choose to make a difference in ways that really matter. And that's what Jim Hoare and Ed Martin have done together. 33 years of service in a community, 33 years of caring for children and families and going over and above time and time again and touching people in ways that 15 minutes, there's no way we can communicate that to you tonight. I will just simply say to you, as an educator for the last 17 years, 33 years of service, hard work, putting your heart out there every summer, every winter, it deserves more than what Coach Hoare is receiving right now. And I implore you, please, reopen this matter courageously. Open this matter courageously and look deep. Thank you.
To the Board of Selectmen. I'm Julia Johnson, and I'm speaking as a paying customer of the town of Yarmouth. I've been blessed to have 2 of my children learn to sail with Coach Hoare and all of his crew. Now our grandchildren are benefiting from his tutelage. No small feat for children of color on Cape Cod. The welcome mat has never been rolled out by the yacht clubs, but it certainly was with Jim Hoare. My children not only learned how to sail, but about the teamwork involved in being successful at a totally new endeavor, sailing on the water, and everything that comes with enjoying sailing on Cape Cod. I also watched Coach with a special needs student. That young man paid rapt attention and learned a lot. A new direction for a sailing program that's so inclusive? Wonder who will be excluded by cost, attitude, or something else. I hope you will reconsider and take some steps on this matter. Thank you for your time.
After this gentleman, is there anybody that would like to express an opinion contrary to those that we've heard tonight already? All right. Is there anybody else that has traveled a distance to come here to say something tonight? All right. You 2 will be our last 2 after this gentleman.
My name is Jack Merck. I live in West Yarmouth. I'm a retired electrical engineer who tutors math at the DY High School. In that capacity, I've come in contact with Coach Hoare and been extremely impressed by his caring and the way he reached children, especially of that age. I also have sent 6 of my 9 grandchildren through the sailing program. One of them has built a sailboat out of scrap wood, all on his own, and from everything he learned in that program. Because I asked him, how did you do that? And that was his statement that he made to me. I've seen him in that capacity as well, as I've just mentioned, and the way he interfaces with kids and lets them enjoy what they're doing, and I think he's made a huge difference, and I think it's a travesty for what is happening here. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Jim Davos. I'm a resident of West Yarmouth during the summer months, along with my wife. But for tonight, we came about 100 miles down from Tewksbury, Mass, to make a plea to your better judgment to allow Jim Hoare to remain in his position as heading ahead of the sailing department. You mentioned you received numerous correspondences through the social media. I sent you one yesterday. I received a reply from probably your administrator this morning saying thank you for your inquiry. I just hope my email didn't end up in somebody's trash bucket. And I sincerely hope you read it, because a lot of the folks that preceded me have already addressed issues that I also have experienced. My wife and I have seen our boys go through the sailing program, learn to sail, learn to race. They participated in numerous regattas, the Cape Cod Knockabout Juniors and so forth. They learned so much through this program. I'm not going to stand here because I know you are pressed for time, but suffice it to say that this matter seriously has to be revisited, because someone who's participated and given so much of themselves over the last 33 years deserves better than what he's receiving right now. Thank you.
Ma'am, you're going to be our last speaker. Go ahead. And while you're heading up there, the gentleman makes a good point. I just want everybody in the audience to know that your emails don't go to a circular file somewhere. Each and every one of us up here receives every single one of them. And I don't want to speak for the other board members, but I feel comfortable in saying that we all read each and every one of them. So don't think that they go unheard. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Kira Casey. I've traveled 2.5 hours from Pepperell, Mass. I'm not as eloquent as a lot of these speakers, but I just really wanted to come here in support of Court Tour. I have brought my 3 daughters through the sailing program. We've been through it for the last 10 years, and I just really would urge all of you to open up this issue. It needs to be investigated, especially just for our kids. You need to show them the right way to do things. This is wrong, and it needs to be investigated, and there needs to be an answer. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anything to say? You do? You
Sure,
have anything to add? I was going to close public comment, but if you'd like to conclude it with a statement, Bill?
Oh, I'd be happy to. Obviously, this is a very, very sensitive issue. We need to be somewhat guarded as to what we can say because of issues of confidentiality. As I've indicated previously publicly, this determination was made by 2 very, very experienced supervisors on staff. They've done it under due consideration. I agreed with their decision. We've taken a subsequent step to explain in some greater level of detail in the executive session this issue to the Board of Selectmen. And having said all that, we've been somewhat busy with a couple of major projects here in the past couple of weeks, as most of you have been busy as well. And we have initiated a process to review the situation. I personally will do that. We reached out to the coach today and his representative, and we'll be meeting to see if there's any possibility of a reconciliation, because as supportive and as you have been to the coach, certainly we have issues that needed to be addressed on our side as well. So we will be undertaking a more thorough review than has taken place so far, and we'll be doing that shortly. And that was the only public statement I wanted to make, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. So I thank you all very much for coming, especially those of you that came from a distance. And with that, we're going to move on with our meeting, but I'll give you all a couple of minutes that for those of you who aren't interested in listening to the budget presentation to exit the back door. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
It's nice to find out a little of this. Oh, well.
You're welcome.
All right. Is everybody that's remaining here for the budget presentation? Is that fair to say? All right. I don't know where Mr. Stone went, but Bill, you want to just poke your head out and see if maybe he's engaged in deep conversation? All right. Next item on the agenda is the FY17 budget presentation. Mr. Henchy?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, it's that time of year again. We're putting a budget together for you. This has been the effort, a lot of hard work. The budget that you'll be beginning to see for the first time tonight is, dare I say it, unspectacular. In order to understand it, you really need to understand it in context a little bit because it is relatively unspectacular standing on its own. I remember when I was first appointed 5 years ago, before I started the job, Peter and I met every night, really hacking apart a budget because we're in the middle of a pretty significant fiscal crisis. And during the course of those several meetings, Peter and I not only tried to put a balanced budget together, but we also began to formulate a longer-term fiscal plan that could put us in a position where we're no longer hacking away at money that provided services, but rather created a budget that was sustainable for our community. And so although this budget is unspectacular, it does represent a milestone in as much as it represents fiscal stability and sustainability for our community, hopefully for some time ahead. Now, the challenge that we faced 5 years ago was even greater than the pretty dire fiscal crisis that the entire country went through. That challenge was compounded over the next 3 fiscal years, where over $2 million additionally needed to be shifted from town appropriation to school appropriation. So it's taken us a period of time, several fiscal years, in order to put ourselves in a position where we can actually have a sustainable budget. Peter and I did a lot of that work. Peter has since led a fiscal team that has been supplemented by Ed Centio and Rich Bienvenu, and that fiscal team now is primarily responsible for all the fiscal concepts that you reviewed several weeks ago, and it's a team that, in the best interest of the town, should as much as possible stay together. So let me begin. If I can go ahead. There we go. Overall goals for the budget, established clearly by the Board of Selectmen, are to remain within the restraints of Proposition 2.5. That's a clear policy statement of the Board of Selectmen, and all the decisions of your staff stay within that restraint. You coincidentally say that you not only have to stay within 2.5, but continue to provide excellence and improve every year the excellence of those services. You need to achieve with this budget presentation not only the goal number 1 of staying within fiscal constraints, but all of your goals. And finally, to provide ongoing organizational sustainability. Significant goals, but very, very clear goals that you as policymakers have given to us, and we've adhered to them, as I will show you. What's been accomplished over the past several years is quite significant. We've not only stayed within the restraints of Proposition 2.5, but 5 years ago there were no funds available within, minimal funds available within free cash to fund routine capital. That had been the case for several years. Capital was relied upon with the availability of free cash. $1.5 million has been found within the existing level of the levy or within the existing budget, and now has been secured ad infinitum. That $1.5 million was a goal set by your Capital Budget Committee, and it has been achieved now for several years. We set about our planning process, which I'll go over in a couple of slides, that will also fairly and adequately fund the schools. This budget produces some funding for a capital backlog, which has been created by the fiscal difficult challenges we've had over the past decade. We've also been able to, within the levy itself, provide over $1.2 million for roads, supplemented by Chapter 90 money gives us $2 million for the roads, actually somewhat in excess of that. This budget provides the full funding for the mandated stormwater costs as well, once again within the levy. This budget represents, I should say, self-sustaining enterprise funds. It, for one of the first time, takes the inadequate 5 years ago levels of reserves, particularly in stabilization, and begins to increase in an adequate way those goals. We provided market rate salaries through a sustainable process of determining the availability of funds and only granting pay raises within those available funds. We provided a capital facility funding through the guidance once again of Peter, to provide a capital facility for future large facility capital needs within this organization in such a manner, in an extraordinary way, of not increasing our taxes. Pretty significant goal in and of itself. We continue to enhance our services in this budget, guided by the goals of the Board of Selectmen, albeit in a minor way. Nevertheless, we're going to be able to provide some one-time only enhancement of services. And we once again provide a very, very aggressive funding for the OPEB, which we had some discussion on in previous meetings. It's not a mandate at this time, but certainly actuarially it's required for us to provide funds for other post-employment benefits, and we've done so in this budget in a manner which is more aggressive than even the more affluent communities here on Cape Cod. That's the budget. Like I said, pretty unspectacular. I'll draw your attention, however, to the bottom line in the last 2 columns. A little difficult to see from your chairs, but if you look at your hard copy, you can see that the budget, by and large, has increased, but in a relatively insignificant amount of money, though $500,000 is significant in my household. In an operating budget, it's relatively insignificant. Now, in addition to that, as we'll show in a couple of slides from now, there has been $250,000 added within that levy opportunity for stormwater mandate as well. What's the budgetary process? And this is a very important slide. It may seem redundant to you all, maybe less redundant for the folks at home, and some other people in other committees hopefully are listening. The Board of Selectmen clearly starts the process by establishing their goals, including fiscal goals. We then assess the needs. We assess the needs necessary to accomplish those goals. We prioritize those needs. We determine economies within the existing budget to save money on the existing budget in order to accomplish those goals. We determine specifically gross revenue that's available to be supplemented to the budget, particularly for pay raises and cost of living increases. And only having done all that, do we formulate a balanced budget as per your number one directive. Well, let's take a look at some of the detail. You've seen this slide since I've been here. Proposition 2.5 allows our levy to go up each year by 2.5%, allows that to take place. It's supplemented by new growth. That new growth figure represents our economic development effort through the community. It represents new tax money that's available to be spent for the first time. You can see in an $80 million total budget, a growth opportunity of 1.6 is not an insignificant, yet sometimes a pretty dire funding increase opportunity. We then take a look at what is necessary to fund the existing budgets and the ongoing operations inherent in those existing budgets. And the first thing we do is take an amount of that available levy increase available to this community, and we set aside a dollar amount for the schools so they can increase their assessment to this, our community, by 2.5%. We're left with a balance, and we're left to stay within that balance. You can see each year we call this slide Budget Busters because there are certain costs associated with our ongoing operation, which are quite significant. Health insurance, pensions, steps, other salary adjustments due to promotions, for example, which I have a specific slide on in a minute. And there's the stormwater that I talked to you before. What that does with those budget busters, we have a surplus in our side or our share of the Proposition 2.5. Now that becomes very, very important. We're going to talk about it in a minute because the budget does not contain, because we have not negotiated salary increases for FY17, we need to have a set aside for that purpose.
Look at different numbers, Bill.
Yeah, I was just going to say.
You are, I'm sorry. This slide has been corrected under pension, and it's been corrected under deficit being a surplus, primarily because I made a mistake in drawing up the original slide. The pension increase is actually much more than that. It's more than $63,000, as you'd expect, because a lot of it's been divided into enterprise funds. And so even though the cost is the number on your slide, it really doesn't draw against the levy. So I've been corrected in that regard. And so in order to do this analysis of staying within the levy capacity, that pension amount has been reduced.
So you're saying the difference comes out of one of the enterprise funds?
All of the enterprise funds, right. It puts us in the enviable position of still having levy capacity for pay raises. As I indicated, one of the others is, and what I've done in this slide really is try to make your discernment of the budget growth particularly as clear as you possibly can. A lot of line items in the budget, a lot of sub-line items in the budget. I just wanted to highlight in this slide some of the increases that, really the only increases in the budget that are not relatively routine like the ones I talked about with health insurance and pension. We have had a pretty veteran management team here, Peter and I, over the past 5 years, and as a result, we have legal counsel and we use it not as frequently as some management teams that are a little bit less experienced, and as a result our legal bill has been kept pretty frugal. Bruce Gilmore has also been working with us, and he has given us an excellent municipal rate. We don't anticipate that's going to continue. We are talking later on the agenda tonight about changing legal counsel, and we thought it was wise to actually take our legal budget, not for case specific, not because we expect more litigation, but rather just because we anticipate that the hourly rates that you'll be entertaining may be greater than the discount rate that Bruce has provided us over the past several years. The second of the other $100,000 is snow and ice, which we talked about that in pretty great length a couple weeks ago. We anticipate to have improved services, and if this is the worst snowstorm we had today, then we'll probably do a really, really good job. General insurance, as you'd expect, not normally in the budget busters. Cost of insurance has just been going up, unfortunately. Not associated with the snowstorms actually last year. And so we put some more money in that. Now, the rest of the bullets a little bit more complicated. They actually, they show as an increase in the budget, but they're offset by revenue. You remember that for the past 2 fiscal years, we're making a transition to the CMAS, new CMAS contract, and you have authorized fee increases. Though there is an increase in the budget for solid waste to pay for a full year of that contract, there is offsetting fee revenue that has already and will continue to come in to offset those costs. The senior service, a relatively small budget, seems to go up fairly significantly, and the reason for that is not new programs. It's really just an accounting mechanism. In the past, the use of the senior center was paid for through a fee. The fee went and paid directly for costs associated with that rental. And what we have been required to do through our annual auditing, and now with Rich on board, is do what's appropriate in that regard, and that's call it an estimated receipt and then increase the budget accordingly. It has not been on the budget before, so that's an offset internally. The OPEB, I indicated that we're aggressive with OPEB, and you'll see if you look at the detail of the budget that we've actually funded $200,000 within the levy for OPEB, not free cash. We're going to talk about that in a minute. But within the levy, our OPEB has increased from $200,000 to $400,000 as an annual contribution, and we have done that by compensating for a reduction in non-exempt debt. So it's a wash in the budget, and it's why it doesn't appear to go up quite as high as it actually does. There has been one increase in this budget of a staff support person, and that's in IT. IT, of course, has been our emphasis for the past several years, and that cost does not appear in the budget that was just flashed previously on the screen, but it's funded entirely by 2 of the enterprise funds, water and septic, which are showing positive revenue trends. The levy accounts for about 75% of our spending annually, but both the schools and the town have other revenue opportunities. Now, some of this is repetitive, but it bears repeating. The local receipt growth that we received in the fiscal year that ended back on June 30th increased by $1.2 million above our estimates. Now, that was primarily due to the efforts very specifically of Ed and Rich. They did that by collecting hitherto uncollected taxes in a more aggressive, fair fashion, and also by cleaning out accounts that had been squirreled away for years. So as much as that's great news, and it's one of the reasons we certified so highly in free cash this year, the recurring amount of that is what really we need to be concerned with. How much of that growth last year, over $1.2 million, is really recurring? It seems like it's not one-time only sources, but recurring sources. That becomes important because you'll know that our policy towards pay raises comes from this very source. And so the growth that can be demonstrated, which has happened already back at the end of last fiscal year, has been set aside for our market rate salaries. That's $400,000. Now this, once again, I said this budget is unspectacular, but you have to understand its nuances, is that the third bullet there represents something that has never happened, at least since I've been here. And that is that no growth anticipated from this fiscal year and beyond has been used to balance this budget. Every year we come forward and we balance a budget based upon anticipated growth, and we did not do that this year. That becomes important in the second to last slide in a couple of minutes here, but that's a major departure over what we're doing in terms of being fiscally conservative. Now that's very important in putting it in perspective. That total value of estimated receipts is $12 to $14 million, and we're already demonstrated from July 1st to today a growth projection this year of 5%. We're not taking it. We're not using it. We're only using the previous year's demonstrated growth. Like I said, it's a nuance, kind of boring, but it's important in terms of sustainability for our budget. Capital. If there's anything exciting about this budget, it's probably in the capital. This is the routine capital, just broken down in categories. We made a supplement because we have so much free cash available to us. Some of that backlog on capital. The Capital Budget Committee was given an opportunity to spend up to $500,000 on the backlog of capital requests. They've chosen to recommend only $350,000 of it, which represents excellent news. It means that the backlog on capital is pretty much caught up. It's taken us a while, but that's terrific news. The capital facility plan, as I indicated, through Peter's guidance, we've put together with the Capital Budget Committee a capital facility plan as opposed to a routine capital plan, which enables us to replace or in a major way renovate our facilities within the existing tax levy structure. So you don't see what you normally see in the newspaper on other communities saying we want to build a fire station, it's going to cost us $15 million, and it's going to increase your tax rate to the average homeowner by $300 a year, and that's what we need. We've put together a plan that can replace our facilities in a 10-year plan in such a way that it is funded by the drop-off of debt, therefore having no tax increase. Golf course improvements, which we talked about, Jim talked about with you a couple of times in the past couple of months, is not necessarily funded within the levy, but it has been planned in such a way that has the same concept. That $2 million expenditure is anticipated to be offset 100% by enterprise revenue. Waterways improvement is the first step into the capital plan we've seen in a couple of years. We're looking at a proposal in the form of a warrant article to have $3 million of waterways improvements, once again offset 100% by debt drop-off. These improvements will not have an impact on the existing tax rate. We're not quite sure on the last one, but there is a debt drop-off we've been encouraging the school to use. They have their own debt. We've been encouraging them to do their maintenance using borrowing opportunities from their debt drop-off to simulate our policy on doing maintenance or capital improvements in such a way that our assessment to them will not go up. So as their debt drops off, rather than having them use that for budgetary growth, we've encouraged them to mimic our plan in such a way that they can fund just their debt drop-off and fund between $500,000 and $650,000 to do major maintenance items which have been delayed in our facilities.
Bill, can I just ask a question?
Sure.
That? That's a little bit different than what we've heard before. Maintenance is the responsibility of the town, which ultimately these are the taxpayers of the town. But where does that leave us with the building renovations?
Yeah. The building renovation is a larger issue, but these two issues overlap. The larger issue is, as you know, the school came to us, and they've had a plan for several years now, to renovate all of their facilities, and the cost is very significant, between $20 and $30 million. This past year, we've had an opportunity to approach them about looking at doing that in a different way to potentially save some money. This doesn't affect that. Those improvements that are here will be separate from those major renovations, and they will be separated out. Obviously, they're not going to do them twice. But these are the more urgent ones that they will define out of that need. Now, our planning will continue with the schools to see if, in fact, we can do whatever we can do to save money on those capital improvements. They received the good news, as I indicated to you a couple weeks ago, that they, for the first time after 5 attempts, have received money's authorization to spend money and be funded by 47%, I believe it is, of project cost for this continued planning. But it's not to authorize, the first step of that is not to authorize the capital improvement in their submitted budget, but rather to do an analysis first about how best to renovate our schools.
Has maintenance ever been, so you're asking them to do an exempt debt themselves?
Correct.
Is that typical that the school would go forward with that?
It's an appropriate process, right. Their debt is in their budget, funded within their assessment. So we could take the obligation ourselves. That's really just technical, Tracy. You can sponsor the article yourself.
Well, no, I guess in my mind we had hoped that the debt drop-off would be able to fund some of the building.
Yeah. Well, we think it can. This is a relatively short-term debt. If you get authorization after a planning period of doing it in a more major way, a larger project for the school, there will be drop-off even of this debt. So it'll be available thereafter.
Do we know yet what the planning cost will be?
I'm sorry, Chris.
The planning to look at the overall project for the school. Do we have a number on that yet?
$650,000. Some portion of this may actually pay our share of that. You know.
Okay.
Yeah. And that's what I mean. It hasn't quite. Would like to have had more definitive data at this point in time, but with a lot of the school planning, they're not coincident, so we don't know the answer to that. These have been preliminary discussions which we've had with Larry, and we'll continue with them, and hopefully we'll get more clarity as we move along. But point well taken in regard to who is the sponsor for this. It happens to be debt out of their assessment, so we're stewarding their debt separately out of their assessment.
Well, what I'm just afraid about happening is we're going to spend the debt drop-off, and then we're going to need, for maintenance, which could come from, maybe somewhere else if we know early enough, and then have to go back to the taxpayers for a tax increase for planning so we don't lose out on the school building authority money.
Since you've asked it for the third time, I'll be more candid with you, Tracy. There's been sufficient funds in the budget, in some people's estimation, to do an adequate job of maintenance in the schools for quite some time. And they've said it publicly. They've said it here in front of you, that those funds have been diverted for other needs. And so what this does, it doesn't allow them to do that. These funds are exempt debt. They can only be spent for one purpose. So you can put maintenance budget till the cows come home in the school's operating budget, and they'll spend it for what they want to because that's their right. If you do it in this particular mechanism, it goes for maintenance and maintenance only. And the same is said for capital improvement. And that's about as candid as I can be, Tracy.
Thank you.
Bill, isn't the distinction between what you might call maintenance and some of the capital costs really a gray area?
Yeah.
Yeah, and the schools may decide one year not to fund maintenance and use those funds elsewhere, but they have to do the projects in one way or another. They may just choose to call them renovations as part of a capital plan. I've seen some items that certainly equipment has deteriorated to the point that it's non-serviceable. But the question as to whether those pieces of equipment should have been maintained regularly, and as opposed to suddenly showing up in a renovation plan, I think that's a gray area.
Well, I think you're right. I think that the term that comes to mind is semantics. I mean, I use maintenance because I had to put something on the slide. I could have said capital improvements on this, and it is really gray. As you move down to appropriate maintenance of existing infrastructure, do you call that maintenance? Do you call it capital improvement or renovation? And so these are very legitimate needs, and I'm not saying the needs don't exist. They'll be able to come over and or go to town meeting and quantify these needs very specifically, which I cannot do right now. But they'll do that first with the capital budget committee and then the town meeting, and it'll be more clear as to whether or not they're maintenance or capital improvements or just renovations. But you're right. It's gray. It has a wide spectrum, but the needs are definitely there, compounded by their lack of infusion of cash in that effort, whatever that effort is, for quite some time. Reserves. We get out of the bad news, get into the good news. The reserves, when I told you about the meetings Peter and I had 5 years ago, we were looking at a stabilization balance. I think it might have been zero, but we got it up to $300,000 that first year. And we are now talking about a stabilization balance, and we talked about this in some level of detail a couple of weeks ago about the fiscal policies in the Standard & Poor's review. We're talking about placing $1 million in stabilization, increasing it up to $3 million. Now, I don't want to spoil the show for next week's presentation when I'm talking about wastewater, but bear in mind, if you can, put a bee in your bonnet, that next week when we talk about wastewater, a stabilization fund balance, which is higher than our goal previously of $2 million, is going to be necessary, not only for the routine purposes we always state, and that is snow and ice and being a bank for our own and being able to pay for litigation if it happens or other reserves, but it's going to be able to be used as a stabilizing tax impact on that major program as well. OPEB, OPEB we've talked about, so I won't spend a lot of time on it. It's not a mandate defined per se, but our actuaries have certainly quantified the need, and it is significant. We also indicated to you, because all communities are in the same cash-strapped position, what we can afford to be able to do, and we've been very aggressive this year in funding OPEB. I already indicated to you that we're adding $200,000 within the levy for an annual contribution to our OPEB obligation. There'll be nearly $500,000 in the FY17 budget between what was already appropriated and will be appropriated again in enterprise accounts, and we're adding to our own as well. There'll be nearly $5,000 of annual amount placed into the OPEB trust. We're also recommending $500,000 from free cash, and the result of that, because of prior years' money that we've placed into OPEB, we're in excess of $1.5 million in the total OPEB reserve. Now, I'd like to say we're there. We're a long way from being there, but it's a start, and the basis for that start is not only a policy that says free cash is going to be spent with OPEB in mind, but the levy is a recurring amount that's available every year. And that's how you solve a problem, by doing something that compounds itself. Finally, in reserves, we have, albeit not in some cases bountiful, adequate reserves in our enterprise accounts, and that's certainly not something that we could have said several years ago. Free cash utilization, we're blessed, as we were, even more blessed than we were last year. Very unusual for a community of our type, and I mentioned why that was the case in terms of the work of Ed and Rich on the finance team. But their efforts and the growth in our continued growth in our economy and frugal budget planning has given us an opportunity to spend or have up to $3.1+ million, and this is a delineation. Now, these come in the formal warrant articles, not in the budget, so that's why I listed them separately, so you'd be able to see the expenditure. We talked about some of these already, but not all, and we'll talk about more in great level of detail over the weeks and months ahead, of course. But stabilization has led a list. OPEB was a significant contribution. One of the advantages of having money in a stabilization is we can bank for ourselves. The fire truck is a perfect example of that. We're actually getting terrific news in terms of our receipts reserved for appropriation from fire, which is much better news than it was 4 or 5 years ago. We have wanted to keep our spending in fire capital within the amount available of receipt reserve for appropriation. We'll be able to do that and still have $500,000 annually for capital improvement in the fire department in and of itself. But this truck that we're talking about here is $690,000. So what we've done, in order to save interest, because normally something of that magnitude, obviously it exceeds $500,000, we normally lease, and we break it over a 3-year lease. Well, leases aren't free, and so leases cost several tens of thousands of dollars. And if we bank ourselves that fire truck, we avoid that interest, and then eventually in the next year, 2, 3, and 4, we'll pay those amounts back to the free cash, which eventually can be used for any other purpose in the future. We have capital supplemental, which I mentioned before, of $350,000. We have service enhancements, which I have a detailed slide on in a minute, of a relatively small amount, but still $200,000. And we have some money that we're putting aside for both planning and feasibility studies. Obviously, the one on wastewater of $200,000 we'll talk about in great level of detail next week. But it's time for us to get off the schneid on the DPW project by bringing someone a consultant in to assist us in that building renovation. The library has they've unearthed some new interest in looking at a more centralized facility, and we'd like to give them some feasibility funds in order to assist them through that deliberation process. Centralized dispatch has been a logjam for me personally, dealing with the police and the fire. And I think that the best way to resolve that issue is by bringing someone on board. The Collins Center was unable to do that for us, but someone similar to the Collins Center will be able to take a look at the dispatch issue and also quantify the costs associated with capital improvements there too. So there are funds in there, a total of $300,000 in those feasibility studies. There are a couple of years we didn't fund tourism, but we can this year, and we are. We're proposing $50,000 for tourism. We're looking at some deficits in this existing fiscal year that'll probably exceed the amount in the reserve fund, and that's primarily overtime for the PD because of all the injuries on duty, so we've set that aside as well. As you can see, there is some set aside. You won't see this in a warrant article more than likely because it won't happen. It'll happen, if it does happen at all, it'll be in negotiations, and that is the success we've had in the past, Peter particularly has had in the past with his unions, to negotiate lump sum pay increases. And finally, that leaves us with a set aside. These are non-appropriated funds that just set aside for snow and ice. Now, obviously, the entire balance of stabilization is available for snow and ice, but we're actually not spending all of the free cash. It's just going to be set aside so it can be appropriated if we need it for snow and ice as well. Service enhancements, I talked about at a greater level of detail. We've spent a lot of time over the past 3 or 4 years enhancing or considering where we're somewhat deficient in our services because of the major cuts. You remember 20% of our workforce was actually diminished back in the housing crisis. Very interesting movie about the housing crisis I just saw. It was really scarier even than I thought when I saw the movie. But the service enhancements we've planned, we've prioritized, and though we don't have an opportunity to increase our budgets because we're not secure in our funding source, the availability of free cash has enabled us to take one-time only infusions, really based upon your goals list, to be able to have funds available to enhance the services we currently provide in a one-time only, no longer thereafter committed amount of funds, and you can see them listed here. Most of them speak for themselves. The opiate addiction program, not quantified. We're setting the money aside to be as aggressive as you want us to be when the committee decides how best to address that issue. Public safety training, particularly for the police, but for both departments, in regard to, frankly, some potential terrorism training that seems absolutely appropriate for all communities. Library materials have been their greatest need, and so we're infusing some money into that. Trees, you've talked about a good deal, and here's how we're addressing it for you. And finally, conservation land management, which has unfortunately been neglected since the cuts in 2007, 2008. Conservation funding, we're in great shape with community preservation funding. Once again, a large expenditure, nearly $4 million in and of itself. Big expenditure of open space has to do with the Parkers River particularly. There's still very healthy reserve balances in CPA, and they'll talk with you in great level of detail about their 8 or 10 articles that divide this funding. These are just the categories for your consideration. Let's talk about FY18 and beyond. Like I said, FY17 might not be terribly spectacular, but you always have to put a budget together. In order to be sustainable, you have to think about more than just a year ahead. You have it as a goal to be sustainable. You have it as a goal to increase your reserves, not only for the reasons we talked about before, but bear in mind we'll talk about a greater need next year. But we haven't passed all the hurdles. You know, we still have the school capital, and Tracy, you mentioned that, and here it is. That's there. Now, our funding mechanism for OPEB is an opportunity for that as well, and we'll talk about it once again in a much greater level of detail with debt drop-off next week. OPEB, you know, we're a long way from solving that problem. This might be aggressive, but we're a long way from solving it, but it's one step at a time on OPEB, and I'll reserve all comments on wastewater until next week. If there's a reason for me to be conservative in this budget, it's this slide. I don't know what the school budget's going to be. We started our planning for our budget the day after town meeting. And we put together a conservative budget. One of the reasons we put together a conservative budget is we don't know what the school budget's going to be. And what happened in the first 3 fiscal years I was here, where at the last minute we had to change our entire plan in order to accommodate their need, continues to be the case. We've made no progress whatsoever on synchronizing our planning with the schools. I should be standing here right now talking about the budget, which includes the school budget, and I'm not. So that's out there. Now, my apprehension about it is two. and I don't know the answers to these questions, but my apprehension about this is two. The first is, I know the policy you have set in terms of COLAs. I know that you've given indication to me that in order to create a sustainable budget, you need to only spend those funds that have been demonstrated to be available. And I know what we have met with our unions and told them of the limits. I know the school exceeded that amount in their settlements, and that's going to come before us at some point in time. They're going to pay for that. That's issue number one. Issue number two is there's been a big shift in population. There's been a shift in population. You know, we may have reached equilibrium on Chapter 70, and that's great, but there's been a shift in population of 38 students from Dennis to Yarmouth in terms of the number of students in the school. I don't know what the impact of that's going to be. So, the reason that our budget has been conservative is to not pre-plan and then have to destroy that planning. The reason that we're not taking advantage of all of our levy capacity or any estimated receipt growth that happens starting July 1st is because you might need that. And that's the best I can do on that at this stage of the game. I know Tracy and I were chatting briefly before the meeting. They gave a little bit more detail on their budget on Monday, but they're going to give us the information when they choose to give us the information. I'll sum it up. I've been talking a long time. It might be unremarkable, but it's a significant milestone budget. We've now turned the tide, and this is a sustainable operating budget primarily because of the policies that you enacted over the past 5 years. Yes, it's conservative. It's affordable to the taxpayers. It stays within the limits as you've defined a Proposition 2.5. And the one thing I want to say here is that in the past 3 years, maybe even 4 years, in my first paragraph in my executive summary, I indicated that through your mandate, you've asked us to get to this point of a sustainable budget out of the bad circumstances by doing more with less. And these are the people who do that for you. They have adhered to that and they've embraced that. They do today more with less, and that's why we'll be able to stay within our fiscal restraints. They provide service excellence with less. That's a mandate, and I suggest that mandate should go beyond the town and include all entities within this organization. That's it. This is the beginning of a long process. You got February, March, and April. As you know, this budget comes to you in the form of 15 or 16 warrant articles. You may have detailed questions on all the budgets and all the departments, and you got plenty of time to bring them in. Norman and I have talked a little bit about some of the specific ones coming out of the Capitol in terms of vehicle maintenance policies, and that's fine. Those issues you have concern about, we want to educate you, we want to encourage you, we want to respond to your questions. And so we'll put together a schedule, you'll put together a schedule, between February, March, and April that'll give you an opportunity to have whatever information you want in regard to this budget. And that'll come before you, so when you stand before town meeting in May, you'll be able to answer any questions, not only here today, but on the floor of town meeting as well, in terms of why you're recommending what you're recommending. And with that, I'll be quiet and take whatever questions you may have, knowing you'll have plenty of opportunity to ask questions in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bill. Tracy, start with you.
Can you talk about the $50,000 in tourism? That's not the rooms and meals tax percentage. That's in addition.
That's correct. There's a percentage of the rooms and meals tax which automatically goes as available for that purpose. The bulk of that goes to the chamber. This supplements that. That's correct.
So I've never seen the tourism. What's the plan for that?
Yeah, there's Karen. I see Karen. Karen can give you more detail on that 50K either now or sometime in the future, wherever you'd like.
Do we want to not ask questions at all and wait till the presentation?
I would suggest that if there is a future specific agenda item planned, which would offer explanation, then we could save it till then, unless you feel. By the look on Karen's face, you were kind of caught by surprise.
I don't mean to discourage questions, Eric. We'll handle the questions we can. I really appreciate it if we get together a list. We'll slap them on an agenda and give you a full presentation, be more prepared. But I don't mean to not handle any general questions you might have right now.
No, Tracy, are you satisfied putting it
I'll
up
just
to
wait. No,
Okay.
I have a lot of questions. You know, the total, I see supplementals for public safety and both for snow and ice. I'd like to know what the total number is. I assume that the public safety training, the portion that we had set aside went into the general budget as well?
It did.
This is not the only training?
That's correct.
Okay, I just want to make sure of that.
Tracy, if I may, there has been a specific list which that $40,000 is associated with. We'll put it in a packet. We'll put it on an agenda. You'll see the details.
Right. I just want to make sure that, specifically, I don't need to know. I just wanted to be sure that I want to say there was a 50,000
100.
each. And then we increased it, and then we said that we were going to work it into the budget. I just wanted to make sure that.
We did. We went through a couple of permutations. We couldn't afford it to put it in the budget. We put it in free cash grants. Free cash grants obviously have real problems, and we've since placed them both in the budget. We have $100,000 in training in both the PD and FD that we didn't have before, at least several years ago. That continues to be in. This supplements that.
Okay. And my only other comment, I'll wait on my specific questions about items. I watched the school committee meeting last night, and they presented a very preliminary budget. So where everybody puts their requests in is the way that they addressed it. It's up over 5%, I think a $2 million delta at this time. So they're going to work to get that number down, and they'll be talking about it again in the future. But there was quite a lot of conversation around the $600,000 that was taken out of education for regular building maintenance. So that's why I asked the question. Thank you.
Look forward to having that discussion with the schools.
Could I ask a couple of general questions?
I was going to come to you next,
No,
Jim.
thanks. Just two questions, Bill. Are we investing the OPEB money we're putting aside, or we're going to put it in the trust with the state, with PRIM?
No, we're actually investing it.
Okay.
And as you know, we have opportunities that we don't with our general stabilization for investment. No junk bonds, though.
Good.
No house, no mortgage money.
The second the second question I have is, when you've transferred these costs to the different entities in their revolving accounts or their
Enterprise, yep.
right, have they built those numbers into those accounts already? Because
Yes.
after we've had the discussion about the fees, I want to make sure the fees we got going to cover the cost.
Oh, that was next week, Jim.
Oh, okay.
No, we have.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
You don't have to tell me how. If we have, we have.
We have.
Good. I'll
In all
listen next
cases,
week.
we began it the previous year, we continued it this year, so the increases for the pension health insurance already in the enterprise were okay.
Good. Thanks.
Michael?
I just had one question, a general question. When you talked about local receipt growth, you said you weren't counting today's growth projection, which was about 5%.
Correct.
So do we expect to see well, nothing will stay the same, we know that, right? So will we see some of that money go to make up shortfalls along the trail in the budget process, or do we expect most of that money to come back in the future in terms of free cash?
Well, it depends, Mike, and it's an excellent question, and it's an interesting and sort of complicated process. In the past, every time I appeared in front of you, I took a look at what this year's estimated receipts were going to grow, and I balanced the budget in anticipation of that happening. Well, it's a dangerous road to go down and stay on. Mm-hmm. So we've specifically said, you'll measure recurring growth at the end of the last fiscal year and only spend that money. So we've been more conservative than we ever have been. That provides opportunities. The opportunities is what I meant by the school slide. In the past, and it's a comfortable way to do business, most communities do, you can anticipate that growth and pay for the growth in that particular regard. Your policy has been interesting in regard to school, however, and that is that if they don't have the same fiscal policies as you, then you're saying to them, if they don't stay within 2.5, they go for an override. You don't have to do that. This provides, our more conservative budget gives you other options than doing that. If their amount is relatively small, $100,000 above their 2.5% growth, you're comfortable with the policies that went into that decision making, you have an opportunity to fund it. by taking a look at your growth potential of estimated receipts. It's not an unusual policy. You've normally done it. It's a relatively safe policy. What I propose is even safer. Is it available? You hit spot on with your question.
Norman?
Yeah, I think just a comment on that in itself. I agree that a conservative approach is more appropriate. I'm really uncomfortable with continually depending on economic growth forecasts to fund our budgets when, if we have a turn of events with regard to the economy, then we're in a position of facing layoffs or something of that nature, which brings about choices of reductions of services, which none of us like.
Yes.
So, I think it certainly would think we'd take a stab at what would be, potential downside. And I don't know if, by not forecasting any growth in the receipts, we're essentially saying that growth, that 5% growth in the receipts, is the downside. And I don't know if that's really an accurate statement or not. But I think we need to take a close look at that as to what the downside is.
And I'll push that argument even further just by saying this. I referenced a conversation Peter and I had 5 years ago when we spent nights hacking the bejesus out of a budget, and every hack we made reduced services. Mm-hmm. We decided that we wanted to get to the point we're at now. Between he and I, we decided that we needed to put together budgets over consecutive years to get to a point we're not relying on the estimated receipt growth.
Right.
And when you get there, you have choices. Now, if you don't use that estimated receipt growth, it goes back into free cash. Now, if it goes back into free cash, it's available for stabilization and it's available for OPEB.
Right.
And it's a one-time only, but it's almost a recurring revenue source.
Right.
And that's option number one. Option number two, and this is not normally talked about, but it can be, you can reduce your spending on the levy by using more estimated receipts. Now, that's trickier. It's a little dicier, but that's the goal. The goal is to give you that option.
Well, I think certainly if the, a hard look at, the downside proved that, realistically, we might have, I don't know, $500,000 left over, then I think that option is realistic to look at some tax relief.
Yes.
And I think that given the fact that a lot of our community has not had increases in income, this 2.5%,
right,
as minimal as that may seem, forces a lot of people into bad choices.
What we're doing here, Norm, is we're doing the best job we can to give policymakers the opportunity to make that determination.
Right.
I will pull the rein just a little bit because you know me, I have to, on that conservative approach, because even though this represents a budget which is now sustainable, there are opportunities if you generate a recurring amount of free cash. Mm-hmm. The opportunities, and let me just paint a brief picture. If you had a stabilization fund, if you hadn't spent it all, and you had a stabilization fund of a magnitude of $3 or $4 or $5 million, you wouldn't have had to have decreased your services back in 2008.
Right.
You could have sustained those services by paying in a stabilization fund. We haven't got to our levels of stabilization where you can do that. So yes, you should consider tax relief every time you look at a budget. But on the other hand, you also need to know that a larger reserve gives you an opportunity to stabilize your service. Right. And we're not quite there yet.
Understand.
And wastewater will compound that a little bit next week. You'll see a need that compounds that. But it's an excellent way to go.
I have a page of questions. I'm not going to cover those because I want to look at the detailed budget and then formulate a final list of questions. But one of the things that I did note is we don't have a projection for Cape Tech.
Yeah.
So we have not allowed a 2.5% projected increase for Cape Tech at this stage?
That's correct, because we have a population reduction on Cape Tech. And so our preliminary information from Cape Tech is that their budget is staying within the restraints of 2.5, yet we're having a lesser ratio of our students, and it should wipe each other out in terms of budgetary growth. We should
Okay.
look at a budget which is neutral from Cape Tech. If in fact that's not the case, that's relatively minor, so we'll be able to adjust for it.
Okay, good. You know, you did bring up the staff position, and I know the charter requires that this board vote on staff additions, so I assume that'll be in a future agenda. There'll be a presentation regarding the staff position.
Absolutely, we can do it however you want. Normally, what happens in a case like that is, tonight, I'm just asking you to send it to the Finance Committee so they can do a detailed
Right.
review. But eventually, you authorize the budget, and the budget, hopefully I've done a good job, and I'll let you know the staff person in there, and that budget, that vote to approve the budget normally is sufficient for that. But we can give you whatever detail you want on that position. Happy to.
Okay. Last question is back on OPEB. Is there a single line item in the budget book, kind of like the health care or pension line item, for OPEB cost?
Oh, more than that. But we do. We do. We have a single line item for the general government side of OPEB expenditure.
Okay,
So we'd be
right.
happy to see that one. But enterprise has separate OPEB. And so we separate those OPEB amounts in the enterprise. So yes and no is the answer to your
Okay,
question.
that's fine. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Norm. I have two questions, and I think Norm already asked this, but I need to ask it and I need to hear it in a way that I can understand it. And I might have the years and the percentages mixed up, so please correct me as I go. But, you know, our 2016 budget was based on a growth percentage of, I think I heard you say 2 or 3%. Is that correct?
I don't remember saying that tonight.
Well, you built the 17th budget without using an anticipated 5%. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes, sir.
What numbers did you use for building previous year's budgets? Was it?
It varied. It really did. And it also depends upon how much increased revenue we have in the estimated receipts. Maybe this answers the question. Every year we track how much we grow in all of our estimated receipts together, and for the past several years, 5 has been pretty accurate.
Okay.
Now, we had, maybe the first year we had closer to 3, but 5 demonstrates holding steady at, or growing just a little bit. But we're not using it, so, you know, we should be more comfortable. But last year we did, and it turned out we were right. It's recurring, but it actually exceeded that growth level. But 5 or 4 or 3 going back years is pretty much how we grew in estimated receipts. The complicating issue on that, Eric, and maybe I shouldn't say this, but how we calculate our estimated receipts changes from year to year. And so it takes some understanding and some calculation on our part to really demonstrate that. We closed down the regional transfer station. That was an estimated receipt, went away. So if you looked at that, you'd think you lost money. Well, you didn't lose money. You eliminated the cost. But generally, after all that analysis is done, we're looking at 5% this year, probably 4% last year.
I guess, so, okay, I hear that, and where I was going with that was kind of another way of asking the question that I think Norm might have already asked. If we today find ourselves with an available free cash balance in excess of $3 million, having planned on that 5%,
Yeah.
what are we looking at for 18 and years beyond without having planned on using that 5%? And if that number, you know, projects to be $3, $4, $5 million, I mean, I guess I don't understand how free cash works. If it's $3 million today and we planned on that 5%,
right?
Simple math would tell you it's going to be $3 million plus 5% next year,
right?
If you didn't plan on using that 5%. So, is that the way it works? Is it a straight line relation like that, or are there other factors that figure into it? And then getting back to the other point Norm made, at what point do we now want to start to think about tax rate decreases? Because you know the town is you know the taxpayers are essentially giving us an interest-free loan.
Well, I mean that's. We're blessed to be at that point to have this conversation. We are. And So I'll try to answer it, make it a little bit more clear in a simple way and then a somewhat more complicated way, Eric.
No, please keep it simple.
The simple way is to take a look at what the projection would be on the estimated receipts if we get 5%. And so somewhere between $600,000 and $700,000. So if those projection holds for this year, we spent the growth from last year for our pay raises. We haven't spent any for this year. What's that projection going to be? $600,000 to $700,000. That's the short answer. The long answer is that's not the only source of our free cash.
Right.
Free cash comes from three sources. Comes from that, estimated receipt growth beyond what our estimates are. B, or two, turnbacks. We manage our budgets. We don't just fund them. We manage the budgets. And so we want to turn back money if at all possible. And that there are opportunities that present itself, and that can be significant. And three, and I mentioned to you before, the last couple of years, the aggressiveness of Ed and Rich and the finance team has brought in non-recurring free cash. That's why we had 2 last year, and we'll have 3 this year. There was nearly $1 million worth of revenue of uncollected taxes and money that needed to be cleaned out of accounts that hadn't been before. So if you look at what your anticipated amount's going to be, and you look at the 2 primary building blocks that recur, one is turnbacks and the other is gross and estimated receipts, we're probably looking at $1 million, Eric. And so if you're going to be looking at subsidy, as I said, there are a lot of needs for that. I mean, there's a list on my board of service deficiencies that rank in the millions that you could do if you wanted to. And the other is that, more importantly, in order to be sustainable, you want to have reserve, because it really helps you don't have service last when the times go down. And it doesn't take a Rhodes Scholar in municipal finance history to know that every 10 we get a challenge. And so preparing for it with stabilization allows us to do what the definition of that word means, stabilize tax impact without reducing services.
I have one more question. This isn't really a question about your presentation so much as a question as how we might do some future planning. I sit on the Cape Cod Tech Building Committee in the next few years, in addition to maybe a $400 million wastewater project and a $20 million worth of school capital. We are going to be faced with a $58 million tech improvement project. I think they said 42% of that would be reimbursable from the MSBA, and rounding up, Yarmouth, by virtue of the number of students we send, would be on the hook for about 13% of the remaining balance,
right,
spread out over 20 years, which equals about, they figured it on a $500,000 house. Apparently we're the only town in Cape that has $300 houses, $100,000 houses. But it was about $60 a year on a $500,000 house.
Right.
So I was wondering, knowing that is out there, and the spending by virtue of the charter that the tech school has may not be within our control. We may be forced to spend that money.
True.
Is there a way we can plan today in anticipation of being handed that bill at some point in the future?
We have, as hopefully you'd expect, we have taken that into consideration. We haven't talked about the issue of debt drop-off, come in with a slide presentation, really quantified that for you in a while. And you're going to see that next week. And so wastewater, the number is huge. School capital we know about. We're not sure what it's going to be, but it's going to be big. It's not going to be negligible. And Cape Tech. Now, the one we commonly forget about is our own capital plan. We have things in our capital plan as well. Well, you're stewarding your tax rate. We stewarding a tax rate on your behalf over the next several years, taking all that into consideration. The one good thing, once again, not to steal the thunder on it next week, is that one of the mechanisms you can make these things affordable is to spread them out. And so the opportunity exists to be able, and we've been, over the past several months, we've been looking at $400 million in project costs, and how do we solve that issue? So when we look at our share of 53 reduced in half by state funding, okay, it's there, but it's doable.
Okay. I just want to know if any consideration had been given to that.
We have, yes, sir.
Okay. Unless anybody else has anything, I'd like to say thank you to all the department heads who have worked sure very hard with the administration on this. We appreciate your efforts, as always. And we will await, you said that there are several more support presentations, actually many more, that we'll be getting over the course of the next few months.
Routinely, next week, you're going to see the list of warrant articles, Eric. There's about 40 of them, so you got several months to review those. But in addition to that, if there are specific questions, specific departments, some of which we took notes on now,
right,
we'll put full-blown presentations in front of you to answer questions. You want to add to that list? Add to the list. We'll schedule it out for you.
Do you need any action tonight on our part?
Technically, you got to submit it to the Finance Committee, but you could take a vote on that, or...
Make a motion that we submit the budget presented to the Finance Committee for consideration.
Okay.
Any discussion on the motion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Approved or abstain? Opposed or abstain? Passes unanimously.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you all very much. Next on the agenda is what I'm hoping will be the final discussion on the town administrator appointment, one way or the other. And before we begin the discussion, Chief Frederickson had asked if he may have a few words with the board.
Good evening. I'm here for my interview. No.
Entry or exit?
Boom shakalaka.
In all seriousness, I'm here with a little bit of trepidation because I have immense respect for all of you and the board for what you've been doing. And to watch what has been going on has been a little disheartening. So I'm hope that I can provide some information to you representing fellow department head and division heads to give you some information that might solidify a decision that will help us move forward. We're all anxious about moving forward. So I think you've all received a letter that was signed by all of department division heads yesterday and delivered to Selectman Tolley. And I'm not going to read that. You already have it. We just want you to know that we strongly support Peter Johnson-Staub as our town administrator. Peter has all of the prerequisite qualities for a town administrator. He's a family man. He's intelligent. He has commitment. He has the experience. He's ethically sound, which is extremely important. He is fair. He has vision. He has a tremendous work ethic and a can-do attitude. As you can see, representative, that budget you just saw is tremendous from where we were 6 years ago. He's a big part of what goes on. And what he has that the other candidates do not have is the institutional knowledge of this town. He knows it inside and out, and he's ready to take off and be your town administrator. I'm here because it's the right thing to do. We don't necessarily want to get into politics, but it's the right thing to do to voice the concerns of the people that work for him. The best is expected of us, and we expect the best to work for. And we think Peter is a good choice for that. It is my feeling that Peter deserves this opportunity as town administrator because he did it the hard way. He earned it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Chief?
Thank you, Chief.
Anybody on the board want to have any discussion? I think if there is no discussion or room for compromise, then we need to move on. Anybody have any thoughts?
I guess I would raise a question whether, certainly we know what each of our positions has been on this question. And I would just raise the question whether an appointment for or just say last time, and I wasn't on the board at that time, when Bill was hired, there was a long-term contract approved and a 5-year agreement. And I would just raise a question as to whether additional board members might agree to a shorter-term employment agreement in order to move forward with this process.
I think the appropriate thing to do is, and if I recall correctly, what we did with Bill was to make the appointment, and then we appoint amongst us a contract negotiating team.
All subject to, it was subject to.
And then
contract
the negotiating team then negotiates the duration and the salary. So I think, I think we had all anticipated going into Bill's negotiations that the duration would be 3 years, but that was certainly, again, up for negotiation, and we ended up negotiating a 5-year deal instead. But I don't think there is any anticipation as we sit here today. So it could be a 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, 5 year. You know, I think it goes without saying, I'm open to any option that anyone might like to offer that could be agreeable to 4 out of 5 of us. It doesn't sound like any are forthcoming, so I will ask that a motion be made that this particular administrator search be concluded.
What's the
Well, we need to move, I mean, we still have a candidate, so I think that if, given that we have a candidate and it appears that that candidate is not going to be successful, I think we need to end this search. I think that the candidacy then becomes null and void. We have to appoint an interim, and we go from there. We can't really not do anything.
No, I don't disagree with you. They'll do something.
So nobody wants to make the appointment, or?
I make a motion that we appoint Peter as an interim effective January 23rd for a period of 90 days.
Is there a second?
Second that.
Is there any discussion on the motion? I do have the obvious question. I would have thought we would need to have officially ended. I'm sorry?
His consent? I mean, we don't even know if he's going to accept it.
Yeah, it can be done tacitly, Eric. I mean, technically you have a process that's open. You could end it if you wanted to. If you don't, tacitly, by taking this action, you've ended that process.
All right, that's fine. What was the date, Tracy? January 23rd?
The last day is the 22nd, correct?
Correct, yes, ma'am.
For a term of 90 days.
I think the charter says that we're only allowed to do 90 days at a
90
time.
days appointment. Okay, and Norm, you seconded that. Is there any more discussion on the motion? All those in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed or abstained?
Abstain.
All right, that passes. That's a simple majority, correct, Bill?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So, Peter Johnson Staub is the interim. Do we need a negotiating subcommittee to?
I would suggest you do that, yes, sir.
Okay. And I think it needs to be 3?
To negotiate? No, you can do a lesser, I mean, certainly you don't.
We did it.
It should only be 2, you and Suzanne.
Suzanne and I did it last
There's
time.
3, there's a quorum, you can't do that.
Good point. Anybody like to volunteer
What is the purpose?
to negotiate? I mean, I would assume that Peter is not going to do 2 jobs for the price of 1. In fact, I know he doesn't intend to do 2 jobs for the price of 1 because I've had the discussion with him. He's going to assume the role of a town administrator, and I think that he anticipates being compensated accordingly.
Once again, standard operating procedure.
Right.
I think that you also want to make sure that he remains eligible for return to his other position, assuming something else happens as part of that process, if he chooses to do that.
Yeah, normally on the vote, Eric, what you'd say is this period is for 90 days or otherwise sooner if a full-time appointment is made, and that implies that his position as security reverts back to his former position, if that takes place.
Do I need to read?
I think you would just, do you agree to include that in your motion?
Well, I thought it was included, but if I need to
We'll be
remove it-
specific when we write it out, Tracy, as long as the board assents to that.
Yeah.
Yep.
I don't mind volunteering for that. I just think that this board needs to set parameters. I don't want to negotiate in any other faith in what the board would wish. So I guess I'm nervous about taking that. We can come up with something and come back to the committee.
I think what we did with Bill was
I would like either Jim or Mike to do that with me, so I think it's important that one of them participate in it.
I would defer to Jim.
I don't have a problem.
I think it'd be good.
So it'd be Jim and Tracy. I think there were several changes we made between Bob Watten's contract and your contract, Bill, but I don't see why we wouldn't reuse the language in your contract.
Most of it should be.
Okay. All right, is there a motion to accept Jim and Tracy as the negotiating subcommittee for the interim town administrator position?
So moved.
Is there a second? I'll second it for discussion. Is there any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed or abstained? That passes unanimously. Now on to the discussion of the town council appointment process. I asked that this be put on here. My meeting was, my memory was jogged by the fact that I have been had someone, a local attorney who represents some other towns, who has been asking me for a couple of years not to forget him when Bruce retires. And
Was it Jim?
it was not Jim.
I was hoping it was Jim.
So, and Bill, will you
If you want
please,
to pay me to do that job instead of this one, I don't mind.
can you please outline our options for us, Bill?
Sure. This is a somewhat gray position, not to borrow a term we used previously, but it's not really an employee, but it is an employee. So you have options here. You can really undertake a process that you just consider as due diligence. So the 2 most common processes that board follows are to just assemble a list of candidates that you're interested in or firms you're interested in, and then ask them to come in, ask if they're interested, and then ask them in to have an interview. So you can predetermine, you can name a list of 5, 6, 7, or 3, and just have them come on in. I'd suggest that the second process might be a little bit more akin to a normal employment, where you advertise and you solicit and you make the field open for everyone. And that way you may get more than you want to spend the time to interview with, but you need to winnow them down. So we'd send out an ad. Don't have to hire a search firm. Just send out an ad. Commonly people use the Beacon in order to do this, and we use the local papers as well.
Use Lawyers Weekly, too.
Lawyers Weekly.
Yeah.
And we'd send that out, see what interests you have, bring that at a public session back to you all again, and decide how many of those or which of those, because we'll get background and vitas and stuff from them, you want to express interest in. And then you define the process from there in terms of how much time you want to spend on this in terms of interviews, and you do formal interviews right here in open session for town council. Now, you don't have to negotiate salary or the rates at that time. You're just looking at their professional competence. And so you make a determination, if you can, to appoint a town council. And thereafter, you take the same process you just did, where you negotiate what their per diem or whatever mechanism of payment is going to be. Because it doesn't just have to be an hourly. It can be a retainer, it can be a retainer draw, or it could be an hourly. But the first process, the first decision mode, Eric, is do you just want to put some names in a hat right now, or do you want to go out and post this and let everybody know you're looking?
Our attorneys have any opinion?
Yeah, I do have an opinion. You know, fortunately, we were lucky enough to have John Crenny for almost forever, so we've only really had 2 town councils in the modern era. So it's a really important position, and if you get the right person, they can be with you a long time, and it's a 4/5 vote to do this. So I think we should follow the broader approach and do the advertising and then have a group look at the entire group and make some recommendations to the board for whatever number the board wants to have come in and interview and go through the process. I think you're going to find that the people that are doing this vary dramatically. One of the things I think you want to make sure you do is when you select, if there's a firm, that you select the individual, and that individual is responsible. Not that somebody else can't do some of the work, but the person that's the point person for you is the one you actually hire. So I prefer the second method.
And one last bit of effort, sorry to interrupt the motion, Jim, but you can make it clear in the advertisement you're looking for an individual and/or a firm, but bear in mind that you can include as much as you want in the responsibility as your general town council. Right. Very common for communities to have special town council on several needs. We have special town council we're very happy with now in terms of labor negotiations. You may want to retain that. So you wouldn't necessarily have to look at all the expertise of legal expertise in this selection. You're really looking for someone who is a generalist. So you can get more, but you have to get the base.
Is that a motion, Jim?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion on the motion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed or abstained? Passes unanimously.
Wow, we're on a roll.
Hey, look at us go. Board and committee actions.
I have a resignation before you go to the side here. So if I could, dear Secretary Clark and Chairman DeYoung, it's with mixed feelings that I formally submit my resignation to the Board of Appeals. I have thoroughly enjoyed my time with the board and serving the public, but I now need to reduce my busy schedule and concentrate on my business with my current work obligations and travel schedule. I would be missing more meetings, and that is not fair to the remaining members. I appreciate all of that you have done and will continue to do, and for the citizens of Yarmouth, thank you sincerely, Deborah Martin, and I'd ask the board to accept the resignation.
So moved with thanks.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, motion carries. We will have on, I think, the next agenda, a list of the alternates that are going to be reappointed, and we're going to have to look at the people beyond that because we have some alternates that are away, so we want to make sure they got a full slate of members at every meeting. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. The minutes of December 3rd and 4th are the interview minutes. Is there anybody prepared to make a motion?
So moved. Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, abstained? Norman, any individual items?
I guess I feel like we didn't finish. We've appointed an interim town manager, town administrator, but we've said nothing about a search process.
Search. You're right.
And, you know,
I guess I did that intentionally. I was kind of thinking we could have a cool down period, a period of some, a period of rest, and maybe revisit the issue in 90 days, 60 or 90 days. I didn't want to throw that into the mix right away, but if people feel strongly that that should be initiated immediately, I would entertain that discussion.
I agree. I just think right now we need to let the dust settle. I think anybody, I think going through the process right now would net the same result, and I don't think it would be fruitful. And so I think if we wait maybe 2 months and start over, we may have a better chance of succession.
I don't think 2 months is going to clear up the budget process if we have no funds available.
I'm sorry, I missed that.
It's not going to clear up the question of not having any funds available.
No.
Okay.
So there are other, there are less expensive search options that Mr. Hinchy assures me that could be conducted without seeking additional funds. But I think if we wanted to do a more thorough and a higher cost search, it sounds like funds are not forthcoming from the Finance Committee, so it may have to go on town meeting warrant article. Which brings us into May. Town meeting's the beginning of May.
Right.
That puts us at 150 days. We have the ability to extend the interim for one additional 90-day term. So we are covered if we need that amount of time.
Okay.
Yeah?
That's fine.
Is that good enough for tonight?
Yep.
Thank you. Individual items. Michael?
I have two. First one is I'd like to offer my condolences to Tom George, his wife Alice, and their family. Their son Tom passed away this morning. As many of you probably know, Tom was our state representative and our town moderator and was a long-practicing attorney in town. And apparently that happened just this morning. So I extend our condolences to his family. The second thing is, on a happier note, I want to wish my wife happy birthday. She's a teacher, and she's taught for 40 years, and I was really reflecting on her valuable contributions to the children in the Cape Cod community when one of the speakers tonight mentioned what a difference a good teacher makes in people's lives, and that's for sure. I've seen my wife turn all kinds of kids. She refuses to accept that a kid can't learn or can't become better or can't progress. She refuses to work with kids that are labeled as unproductive by others, and all of her kids advance and become better students. So I'm proud to say that I'm married to a teacher. The other thing I like to say is that these things are also true, as many people gave testimony to today, of Jim Hoare. I was so impressed that some people that he taught and that he took care of were there for him and drove 2 and 2.5 hours. That to me is unbelievable. I've never seen that done before on an issue like this. I'm a big believer in open government. I was really happy to see the people come out and express their feelings to us, not just because of this issue, but on any issue. I think this is the people's government, and I love to see that level of participation, that level of passion, that level of caring about the community that you live in. We need more of that. So I thank those people for coming out and expressing their feelings to us. Thank you.
Thank you. Tracy? Sorry? Jim?
Yeah, I forgot my Christmas message this year, so I'm going to give it to you now. It's a little late, but it's a quote from Mother Teresa, and maybe it's good for us to hear it too. And the quote is that few of us can do great things, but all of us can do small things with great love. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Norman?
I'm all set, thank you.
I can't follow Mother Teresa, so Bill?
Biblical quotation?
No, just a consent agenda, please. Please spare us.
How about Latin? Magnas varnas and aquas spectabas.
Oh.
Does that mean we're adjourned?
Uculis in executu. Consent agenda has nothing but donations.
So moved.
Is that what you just said in Latin?
Yeah, that's exactly what it was, Jim.
I'm afraid of what he just said in Latin. Sure.
Second.
Any discussion on the consent agenda? All those in favor?
Aye.
Norman?
Yeah, I just wanted to say publicly, I'm going to be out next week, which and then another week in, I think it's late January, early February, with some travel plans. And I won't be here for Bill's last week on the job or for his last meeting. And I just want to repeat what I said privately. It's been a great pleasure working with you, and your professionalism and hard work have really done wonders for the community. Your work in front of us and behind the scenes has just been excellent. So I wish you all the best for the future.
Thank you, Norman. Appreciate it.
I think we should prepare something very long for him to read so he goes out the way he came in.
I'll be honest, I'm going to bring a box of Kleenex
The
next
fee
week.
list. I can do the fee list
I think
again.
you should.
Encore performance of the fee list.
Any updates, Mr. Hinchy?
Other than I can sing in French, nothing, sir.
Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
We are adjourned. Thank you.